way of purifying organic compounds, in which first of them is crystallization. Well, you see, crystallization is normally done for impure sample which you have, which is normally in the solid state. Okay, so you can see that formation of pure crystals of a compound by cooling a hot saturated solution of any impure sample, in the suitable solvent is called crystallization. Okay. Well, the principle behind this is solubility of solids in liquids. When it comes to solids, when you add it to liquids, and it increases as the time increases, and the saturation solution is prepared by increasing the temperature, which on cooling crystallizes the substance. So that is a basic idea. I'm sure you have an idea about this. That whenever we add a solid to liquid, okay, and we start increasing the temperature, right, then the saturated solution will start increasing the solubility, and which it will go up to the super saturation, and then we cool across that, so we'll see the crystallization takes place. So this crystallization is of two kinds: simple and fractional type of crystallization. Okay, so let me tell you what is a simple type of crystallization first. Simple crystallization is used when the solubilities of compounds and the impurity, okay, so whatever the impurity that is present in the compound, that solubility and the impurity are having a sufficiently large difference in their solubilities. Okay, so if the solubilities of the compound and impurity is sufficiently large, then we'll use the crystallization. Okay, and a solvent is selected in which the compound is sparingly soluble at room temperature. We always try to figure out a solvent in which the organic compound which you are adding is sparingly soluble at room temperature, but it will start appreciably soluble. It will start getting appreciably soluble, okay, at higher temperatures. So as the temperature increases, it will start its solubility more and more, and thereby impurities are fairly soluble at room temperature. Okay, so we can see that there is very less amount of solubility of impurities, which is normally seen. More amount of solubility of impurities, which is seen. So this is the basic idea and principle behind simple crystallization. One thing you must see that the solvent must have relatively low boiling point. Okay, this has been a question which is asked in JE once, like, what should be the solvent's boiling point in crystallization? It should be relatively low boiling point so that it can easily be removed from the crystal. Okay, and what are the commonly used solvents here? Water, ethyl alcohol, benzene, acetic acid, ethyl acetate. These are some best examples of using the different types of solvents which will help for purification of this organic compound. Okay, so let me show you pictorially what exactly we are doing. Okay, so here we are in fact heating the you can see that here in fact this is, we are heating the solution here. Okay, so and the entire solution becomes hot here. Okay, and that has been filtrated first, right? So during the filtration, some amount of insoluble impurities will be left over, and once you get that filtrate, you take that filtrate and let it cool. Got it? Now while cooling itself, the crystals will start forming, and this would be the pure crystals which are forming, and which is our desired organic compound. Okay, so this type of a funnel which you take, this is called a Buchner's funnel, okay, through which we let the filtrate pass, okay, through the filter paper, and there is still some amount of liquid which will come down after filtration also, and this would still have some amount of organic compound, and which is what we call it as mother liquor. So again, there was one simple question asked like, what is mother liquor? So I hope you guys understood this. So after filtration, whatever that you will get is a mother liquor. After you get that, these crystals will have some amount of moisture attached with that. So to remove that, what we'll do, we'll put it in the desiccator. okay, and try to remove all the moisture using anhydrous calcium chloride. Okay, so that way you will dry the crystal in vacuum desiccator. So these are the primary steps which you will see in simple crystallization. Okay, so I'm just giving a basic idea that what is happening in simple crystallization. Okay, the point is two important points which you must know is that the hot filtrate, right, the hot filtrate after cooling separates the pure crystal, leaving behind the impurities in the residual solution, and that residual solution is what we call it as mother liquor. Okay, in case if there are any color impurities, okay, that can be removed by boiling the prepared solution of the sample with small amount of activated charcoal. So during the boiling process here, if we put some activated charcoal, that might absorb the colored impurities in case if there are any colored impurities. Okay. So this is the basic idea behind simple crystallization. Now see what is fractional crystallization. See, fractional crystallization is used when you have more number of valuable solids. So we have more number of valuable solids, as in more number of organic compounds which are mixed together and which is important for us. Then fractional crystallization is being used. Okay, the idea is pretty simple. You have to do a similar kind of crystallization here, but that should be recrystallize all the time. Okay, so at every different boiling point, as you keep as you keep heating them, right, you will see depending upon the boiling point, okay, sorry, depending upon the melting point, one of them will crystallize first. So you have to keep on doing it as a recrystallization. So the idea behind fractional crystallization is recrystallization. Recrystallization. So as long as we keep doing recrystallization, we would get, we'll be able to separate those two organic compounds from impurities. Okay. The second method by which purification can be done is sublimation. Well, sublimation is usually preferred when you have solids changing from solid to vapor and hardly getting into the phase of liquid. So without getting through the liquid phase. Okay. So the principle on which we are doing is that the sublimate, which is the organic substance, and non-volatile solid impurities are present. Okay. So for example, if a camphor is present, with maybe some amount of sand or with maybe some amount of clay, right? So it would be easier to sublimate that so that camphor vapors can be collected and again they can be uh, condensed back to camphor. So sublimation is normally used for those purposes. So you just need to have an idea about what are the examples which are used. Okay. So these are the examples, typical examples which are asked in exams. So camphor, naphthalene, anthracene, benzoic acid. These are the typical examples where sublimation takes place. Okay. Next, distillation. The third important separation method is distillation. Now, so far, these two things which we have studied is mostly for the solid organic compounds. Now we are getting into more liquid organic compounds. So distillation is done when you have an impure liquid organic compounds. So this is the process which involves vaporization of an impure liquid at its boiling temperature and condensation of vapors to pure liquid by cooling. Okay. So the idea is clear that we need to make sure that impure liquid is boiled. Okay, and this liquid is what we call it as distillate. The one which we collect is called as distillate. Okay. Now, liquid usually begins to boil when the vapor pressure becomes equal to external pressures. I think this is the basic definition which you know. Okay. So at boiling, what you observe that the bulk particles, even from the lowest part of the container, they will acquire enough kinetic energy to escape away from the surface. Okay. So you would see a rapid evaporation happening. Sorry. So boiling is more about a rapid evaporation. So on rapid evaporation, most of the particles, okay, along with the impurities, okay, that might come above uh, the liquid surface, and they'll start converting into vapors. Okay. Again, there are two to three different types of distillations. First one being simple distillation. Okay. This method is employed, okay, to separate the liquid mixture, right, of if you have two liquids in which one of the component differ appreciably in their boiling point. So boiling point difference must be at least 30 degrees. Right? So if you can maintain, if these two solutions, right, if at all they have a boiling point difference of around 30 degrees, there is a high chance that we can separate them out by simple distillation. See what might happen in the simple distillation. Okay, so you will take an, okay, impure liquid, right, and you heat it and let it boil. Okay. So as you start boiling, most of the vapors will start coming out of it. Okay, and as long as the one which has more boiling point, that will remain in the solution, and that remained is called as usually residue. Okay, and the vapors which are collected, right, and condensed, that is called the distillate. That's called as distillate. Okay, so that is the basic idea behind distillation. Okay, so see, Lebig condenser is normally used to cool the vapors. Okay, so which is nothing but a water bath. So across that water bath, as the vapors will start moving, they will start condensing. Okay, so this is the basic idea behind simple distillation. Now let's see what is fractional distillation. So fractional distillation is a method that should be used when you have two or more than two valuable liquids, okay, and their boiling point don't differ much significantly. So that means approximately the boiling point difference is around 1 to 15 degrees. Okay, so in that case, it would be difficult. It would be difficult for us to simply differentiate the vapor and liquid in terms of two different substances. So hence, what we do here is that first we take the liquid solution, okay, and boil it so that the vapors will start coming out for it. But these vapors will still have the mixture of both solute, both the liquids. So it all makes a lot of difference in what kind of a fractionating column you are using. Okay, so when it is passed through a fractionating column, right, slowly you will start differentiating, or slowly you will start seeing the vapors getting differentiated, and eventually one of the uh, liquid will start condensing as a distillate. Okay, so normally this mixture, you can see, is heated. This mixture is heated to a high temperature and pass through a condenser packed with glass beads or broken china. So usually we will pack this entire thing with glass beads or broken china, right? So basically it's a mica and different types of stones which you add. So as the vapors ascend, they condense partly on the glass beads and fall down. Okay. So as they start moving upwards, okay, what you would observe is that as they start moving upwards, there will be some movement. Suppose if this is in the column, right, some vapors are going upwards. So as they start hitting up this beads, they'll again start condensing. Okay, so can you see an equilibrium can be established over a period of time? See what would happen here. So as the condensed vapors fall onto the hotter glass beads, because as you see the lower, lower beads will always have, more hot temperature as compared to those of the ascending beads. So as they start hitting down, again they'll start vaporizing. So you would see as the hot condense falls on the hotter glass, they again start vaporizing as they go to ascend. Okay, and this leads to an infinite number of vapor condensation equilibrium process that can be established. Okay, so over a period of time, you will see an equilibrium has established where, you know uh, vapor and condensation is happening, and slowly some amount of vapors will come onto the surface. So the component with the lowest boiling point, okay, comes out of the condenser at a particular height, okay, followed by the high boiling point components. So you will measure the temperature, okay, and through thermometer, and check out what is the boiling point. Based on that particular boiling point, right, so you will differentiate whether it would be of a, lower, what do you say, the first liquid or the second liquid. Okay, so for instance, if you check out how does that work, you will see crude oil, for instance, the crude oil which has been extracted, okay, will always have a lot of organic compounds, right, from petrol to diesel to Vaseline, okay, so naphtha, everything. So to separate them out, we use fractional distillation by columns. Okay, there will be long columns used, and they'll have different trays. Okay, so here the idea is about putting all the trays, okay, like this. So this way. So the vapor keep moving this way on the entire direction here. Okay, so they'll keep moving like this. So at every moment, you will see some amount of condensation is happening, and temperature at every tray would be different. So depending upon the boiling point of a particular crude, you will make an outlet at that point. So suppose here there is one outlet, here there is one outlet, here there is one outlet, like that. Okay, and that is all at a particular temperature. So at those temperatures, you can start collecting the different forms of crude oil. Okay, so at one particular temperature you will get petrol, at one particular temperature you will get diesel. Normally the one which has lower boiling point will be extracted at the topmost trace, and the one which has high boiling point will be extracted at the lower end, or it will be remained in the residue. Okay. For example, methyl alcohol and acetone, these two can be separated. Got it? So these two can be separated using fractional distillation. Benzene and toluene can be separated by using fractional distillation. Okay. So I hope all of you got an idea. So basic thing which you need to remember here is that the difference between the liquid boiling point should be less, okay, as compared to that of simple distillation. Now, check out about this distillation under reduced pressure, or also known as vacuum distillation. In vacuum distillation, what we are doing, okay, uh, we will want them to decompose much before than the normal boiling point. So suppose if you have liquids which can decompose below their normal boiling point, right, then we cannot make them to boil up to their boiling point, because we will lose out the compound itself, because it will decompose. So boiling point of the liquid decreases with increase in external pressure. So we use this principle, right? So where what we'll do, we'll try to decrease the external pressure so that the boiling point of the liquid decreases, and it so decreases that it won't decompose at that particular temperature. Okay, so that way we will retain the identity. Okay, so here you can see that we will be using an crude, we'll be using a sample solution here, okay, and that is being heated. As it start condensing here, you can see, we can see there is a vacuum which is being trying to create, correct? So we'll try to create the vacuum here, so that the entire zone will start having less amount of external pressure. So because of that less external pressure, what you would observe is that it will boil at a much lower temperature. So for example, glycerol decomposes at a normal boiling point of 290 degrees, okay, when it is outside pressure is 180. But it can be distilled over 180 degrees, okay, under a pressure of 12 mm of mercury. Right? So if you can decrease the pressure to almost 12 mm of mercury, which is very, very less, or we can almost call it as a vacuum pressure, right? So under that particular pressure, glycerol will distillate around 180 degrees. So that gives a lot of help, because glycerol won't decompose at that particular temperature. Esters can be separated by this method. In fact, most of the esters can be separated by this method. Well, this is not directly asked in JEE question, but this was one of the neat questions in the recent times, that which particular type of uh, family member of organic compounds are usually can be separated using reduced pressure distillation. So I think the idea is clear, students. So this is an important area, steam distillation. So how do we do steam distillation and what is the use of it? Well, this method is employed when you have liquid mixture having a compound which is steam volatile and immiscible in water. So two conditions are important here. One, it should be steam volatile and it should be immiscible in water. Now, what does that steam volatile means? It means it should be able to mix along in vapors of water, which is nothing but steam, okay, and start moving, and those vapors will start mixing with the water vapor, and they'll start condensing. Okay, so the principle here is the mixture of organic liquids and water boils when some of the some of the vapor pressure of the liquid P1 and vapor pressure of water P2 becomes equal to atmospheric pressure. Okay, see, normally if you see anilines, okay, or substituted anilines, nitrophenols, so they will have usually very high boiling point. Okay, the problem is getting to that level of boiling point is also difficult. So what we will do, we will let a stream of, okay, steam get into that flask, or get into that particular in vessel, right? So there we would let this compound mix with water and decrease its vapor pressure. Okay, now the sum of the vapor pressures of water vapor and this liquid which is vaporizing, these both would be equal to the atmospheric pressure, and that would help this to get easily distillated. Okay, so you can see that. So steam from the steam engine or steam generator is passed through the hot liquid mixture, and the steam volatile liquid boils at low temperature than its boiling point. So that's the important part. Let me show you an example. See, aniline is purified by non-volatile impurities by steam distillation at 98.5 degrees. The boiling point of aniline is quite high, 143 degrees or something. Okay. So, but on adding it with steam, the boiling point has come down drastically to 98.5 degrees. So rather it's not boiling point, it is a mixture of that steam. So at that particular temperature, the entire thing has been converted into steam. And at this temperature, vapor pressure of aniline is around 43 mm of Hg. And while vapor pressure of water is 717 mm of Hg. So sum of those two is 760 mm of Hg. So that would help, aniline to get purified from the non-volatile impurities. Okay. So because it will mix with the steam at a lower temperature and comes out, and gets condensed. Okay. So you can see that here. So this is the steam generator, guys. Left side you would see this is the steam generator, and steam is going into the solution, right? So from here, as the steam start mixing along with the steam, you will see that organic compound will start coming out of the coming out as vapors and condense here. So as it condense, as I said, the important part is it should be immiscible with water. If it is immiscible, then we can have two different layers, one aqueous layer and one organic layer. When you have two different layers with a phase boundary, it's very easy to separate them. Okay, so it's very easy to separate them just by using a funnel. You can remove out the aqueous solution which has lower density, and that's how you can distillate and purify the organic compound. Okay. So that's pretty easy. All you need to understand is that when steam generator, when should be the steam volatility used. Okay, right now. Check out these points. The stream mixture is cooled to get a liquid which has two layers, organic and aqueous layer. Further, they can be separated by simple filtration. Okay. Example is orthonitrophenol can be separated from a mixture containing ortho and paranitrophenol by this method. Because orthonitrophenol is actually steam volatile. That means it will mix with the steam and come out and that will get distilled. Where paranitrophenol remain as the residue. So you can easily separate both of them. So that is a way you can actually separate ortho and paranitrophenol. I hope all of you understood that. So if anybody has a problem, anybody has a question, see, I'm just going through the theory because this is a lot of theoretical part. Please keep writing in your books. Okay, whatever questions you come across, you can pass it on to me on the chats. Okay, you can send me later on the WhatsApp, either ways. Let's check this. Differential extraction. The next important type of extraction and purification is differential extraction. Well, this method is based on the fact that organic compounds will be more dissolved in organic solvents. Okay. So if I take any organic compound from an impure mixture, it can be recovered by treating the mixture with an organic solvent which dissolve the solvent more. Okay. So for instance, if we check out, this is an organic substance in aqueous layer. So there is a quite an amount of organic substance present in aqueous layer. So on top of that, we have added an organic substance that will be the solvent. So slowly over the period of time, what would happen? This organic substance will start getting dissolved in the organic solvent and it will form a layer. This is the layer. And the other layer will be the aqueous layer. So slowly it is trying to get separated away from the water. And once you have the phase difference, you can filtrate that and get only the organic substance present in organic layer. Got it? So you can see the aqueous layer can be removed out and organic layer will be remained here. Okay. Once you get the organic layer in a solvent, you can separate that solvent or organic substance using by basic distillation, simple distillation, because you would choose the organic solvent such a way that the boiling point between that organic substance and organic solvent is at least at the difference of 30 degrees. Okay, so that can be again distillated and finally you will get the organic substance. Best example is, if you check out benzoic acid, that can be recovered from aqueous solution by uh, aqueous solution which is containing NaCl by treating with benzene. Okay, so if this is the mixture which is present, benzoic acid, NaCl and H2O, you treat that with benzene and what you will get? You will get benzene plus benzoic acid in one particular layer. NaCl and water will get separated out. Okay, so that way we can separate out benzene from water and NaCl. So I think the case is clear, guys. Okay. Now check this next important separation, which is chromatography. Well, this is the most modern and efficient technique which is being used right now. So chromatography is the most modern and efficient technique, and it is extensively used in research laboratories to separate a mixture of compounds into components to purify it and also test the purity. So this is the whole purpose of chromatography. Chroma, which means color in Greek, is used as one of the ways to detect the compounds and whether they are separated or not. Check out the basic principle here, right? The separation based on a difference in the affinities of compounds of a mixture for two different immiscible phases. One is a stationary phase, the other one is a mobile phase. Okay. So basically it's similar to that of what we have seen above, differential extraction, except that here we will make it into two phases. One is a stationary phase, the other one is a mobile phase. Okay. Got it. So if at all we see, if at all we say that we have two different phases, in these two different phases, the substance, organic substance would have different affinities. In one of the either in the stationary phase or in the mobile phase, the affinity of the compound would be more. Okay, and that would really help, you know, for separation. Let me tell you how. Okay, so you can see stationary and mobile phase separations. See, normally once you need to check that stationary phase is nothing but a liquid or a solid phase which is used. Mobile phase is always liquid or a gas phase. Okay, I'll tell you what exactly is this stationary and mobile phase. Check it out. Now, partition between the two phases, that is separation between two phases, can be defined into two different types of chromatographies. One type of a chromatography is based on the physical properties like adsorption. Okay. So if the adsorption of organic compounds in a mixture of organic compounds, they have different level of absorption, right? Then that type of an chromatography is called adsorption chromatography. In case if the solubility of the organic compounds is different, then you call them as partition chromatography. So there are broadly chromatography can be classified into two kinds: absorption and partition chromatography. You can see that chromatography is divided into two kinds: absorption and partition. So check that in absorption, the stationary phase is solid and the mobile phase is liquid or a gas. While in partition chromatography, stationary phase is liquid, mobile phase is liquid or a gas. Okay. So this is the basic difference. What are the types of chromatographies we will see in adsorption chromatography? Check it out. Gas solid chromatography. Okay, so where gas is in the mobile phase, solid is your stationary phase. Correct. So that is called gas solid chromatography. Similarly, liquid solid chromatography, where liquid is the mobile phase and solid is the stationary phase. Liquid chromatography is called as LC. Is again converted. I mean, these are one is a liquid column chromatography, one is a thin layer chromatography. Both belongs to liquid solid chromatography. Okay, so this is the basic difference in adsorption chromatography. Now you see partition chromatography. In partition chromatography, the uh, stationary phase is also liquid. So hence we call it as liquid-liquid chromatography. And one more thing we can check it out is gas-liquid chromatography. Okay. Out of which the most useful one are these two. Got it? For our syllabus, which we have is mostly about liquid column chromatography and thin column chromatography. Okay. Now let me tell you exactly what is happening in this liquid column chromatography, or in short, it is called as column chromatography. If you see in NCERT, it is given as column chromatography. Okay. So what's happening in column chromatography? You see a column of adsorbent, okay, mostly a silica gel or alumina gel, is prepared by suspending finely powdered adsorbent in the suitable medium like petroleum or ether. Okay, so we will take an adsorbent like silica gel or aluminium. Okay, we'll take it as small pebbles, and in that we will add a suitable medium like petrol or ether. Right. So you can see that this is that particular uh, bed of entire column. Okay, and in this column we added some solvent. Okay, and then we started putting out the mixture of compounds. The organic sample which we have, we'll start putting that into the column. Okay, so as we put that, slowly what would happen as the time starts, as we start moving over the time, okay, you will see slowly there is a movement of that organic compounds, okay, going down the uh, adsorption column, going down this column. Got it? So what has happened now? If you check out slowly, the movement of solution which is happening is because of that solvent which you have added, and that is known as eluent or mobile phase. Okay, so eluent is always known as the mobile phase. Got it? So which is responsible for these particles to slowly move down. Now, as they start moving down, that this entire adsorbent, which is the alumina or silica gel which we are taking, that is the stationary phase. So that adsorbent is not moving. So that is the stationary phase. Okay. So I hope you got some idea about what is happening here. Okay. Now you can see above and below we have added some sand, and this is some adsorbent silica as well as aluminium, maybe alumina has been added. Okay, and finally we have a glass wool at the end. Now as the time passes, see at time t1, see after certain amount of time what happened, you can see A started separating out from B plus C. Okay? You can see A started separating from B plus C. Again, some more time passes. B started separating from C. Okay. This depends upon the rate of movement of organic substance in that particular mobile phase, and that is the eluent. So as the time passes more and more, you can see A and B got already separated, and C slowly will start coming or condensing down. Okay, and once after the entire C has been separated, again you remove that and put the new flask so that you can get the B. Okay, and the finally leftover organic substance which is present in the column would be A. Okay, so we can say the rate of elution for A is less, the rate of elution for C is more. Okay, so that way A, B, C can be separated out. Okay, so you can read this. The mixture to be separated is dissolved in a solvent, loaded onto the column, and as the solution descends into the column, this slow movement of solvent descending down the column, that principle is called elution, and that solvent is called eluent. Okay, so that's how the column chromatography takes place. Best examples in column chromatography is the plant pigments, which can be separated using column chromatography. Different color pigmentations coming from plants can be separated using column chromatography. Achha. One problem here could be the A, B, C, which we are taking, organic compounds. They may or may not be colorless. Okay. So if they are not colorless, it becomes difficult for us to understand when to stop, at the point C, and maybe the C is done and now I have to extract B. So if color is not observed with the visible light, right? So we will use ultraviolet light through which we can see the difference in the colors. Okay. See, I hope all of you got an idea now. So just go through that notes once again. See, thin layer chromatography. What is happening in thin layer chromatography? Here the stationary phase is silica gel or alumina, and mobile phase is the eluent which is flowing through. Okay. Now what exactly is the procedure here? We take a thin layer which is about 0.2 mm thickness and put a slurry of adsorbent, okay, on the glass plate or a celluloid paper. It is dried and solution is mixed of solution of mixture whose components to be separated is applied as a small spot about 2 centimeter on the end of the TLC, that is thin layer chromatography plate. So basically it meant that if you have this uh, thin layer chromatography paper on this paper, we will put a slot here, a spot here of solution which we need to analyze, okay, and which is at least separated from the bottom by 2 centimeters. Okay. And the thickness of the adsorbent which you are adding on it is around 0.2 mm. Okay. So when we do that, the plate is then placed vertically in the closed jar containing a suitable solvent for developing the chromatograph. Okay. So basically now what we are doing, we will put this we'll put this paper into a solution, right, which is the solvent, But you have to ensure that the solvent does not touch the spot. Okay, so you need to keep the paper just above, uh, the spot should be just above the solvent. Okay, so that thing you need to be taking care of. Okay, so you can see it is ensured that the spot stays above the solvent level. And now what happens? Solvent moves up the capillary action, and the components of the mixture move up through the adsorbent layer at different rates depending upon their degree of adsorption. Okay, so now the solvent will start moving up. Okay, uh, over the TLC plate. Got it? And it will obviously cross over the sample spot, which is of A and B organic compound, right? And the solvent, one thing you need to take care of, this is asked in JE once. Solvent has the highest rate of travel, and leading edge of the solvent is known as the solvent front. That means if you see the degree of adsorption in comparison to A, B and solvent, it would be most for solvent. And the moment of the rate of traveling of solvent would be the highest as compared to that of the sample which you are taking. And that is the type of solvent we have to take. Okay. So when we take that, now let's see what is happening here. So after some time, now this will be the new situation of the, you know, TLC chromograph, chromograph now. See, this is the solvent front. That means the maximum point up to which it can reach. So this is the maximum point up to which it has reached. Then you will stop it and remove this chromatograph. Okay, and analyze the spot. Originally the spot was here. Okay, and in this particular illusion, okay, so that means the as the solvent start moving, these two components got separated at a different distance. Okay, so from the original spot, both the components got differentiated at a particular distance. So you can see that spots A and B are visible if they are colored. If spots are colorless, then we can use this detection putting the plate under ultraviolet light. Okay, and then we mark it where exactly they have been pointed. We will mark all the points. So the compound, in case if at all compound is not visible properly, we can use iodine also, and it shows brown color spots as we spray iodine onto the TLC chromograph. Spots will glow with brown color spots. Okay, the same thing, similarly it is adopted for amino acids. When we have to separate amino acids, so amino acids are usually not colored, so hence we spray some amount of ninhydrin. On adding some amount of ninhydrin, amino acids will start becoming colored. This point is important because this is going to come again in biomolecules for you. Got it? So what is ninhydrin? How it is useful amino acids? You will see that slowly. But as of now, you remember that amino acids will form colored, spots with ninhydrin. Now, these color spots are at different distances. So if you check it out, the color spot for component A is at a distance y dash. Okay, and for component B, it is at distance y. And solvent has moved up to a distance x from the original spot. Okay, so how much is the difference can be analyzed by a particular term called retention factor. This is called retention factor. So the relative rates of migration of components, okay, you can read this, the relative rate of migrants of each components of the mixture with respect to the developing solvent, that is expressed in terms of retention factor. Okay. Now what does this retention factor tells us? That it is the distance traveled by the compound from origin by the distance traveled by the solvent from the origin. So this is also giving us an idea that RF is always less than 1, because the distance traveled by solvent is always will be higher than that of the distance traveled by the components. And that is the type of solvent we would usually choose. Okay. So if you take that, so we'll get what is RF. So I hope all of you got this, what exactly is RF now. Analyzing this RF, we will understand how to separate out the components. Okay. And this Distance is something which is important in analyzing chromatography. Okay. Again, we'll not get into the details of how the analysis is to be done based on the distance. All you need to know is what is this RF factor. As much as J syllabus is concerned, you just need to know what is this RF factor. Okay. So I think the thin layer chromatography is clear, guys. 1 second. Okay. See the next one. This is the last type of chromatography, which is paper chromatography. Paper chromatography is a liquid-liquid partition chromatography. So this is a partition chromatography. So in NCERT, you might see there are three chromatographies that has been emphasized. One is thin layer chromatography, column chromatography, and finally partition chromatography. Okay. Now check it out. A strip of chromatographic paper, okay, so also known as Wattmann filter paper, okay, that is taken. It contains water trapped at the molecular level, which acts like a stationary phase. So basically, it is some kind of a paper which would have some water adsorbed in it, more like a tissue paper, which you can check it out, in which water may be strongly held. Okay. So it is based on the fact that different components of the mixture undergoes, uh, you know, partitioning between water and an organic solvent to different extents. Okay, so it's more or less like the solubility of that two different organic substances which we need to separate. They are different in this water phase and an organic solvent phase. Okay. So what again we need to do is that we ensure that the edge of the strip dips into the solvent, but the spot remains above the surface of the solvent, just like in thin layer chromatography. Okay. So this time the stationary phase here is not the paper, but the water present in it. Water present in it. So that's why it is called the liquid-liquid chromatography. Okay. So then we make sure that end of the uh, paper touches the solvent, so that solvent will start moving around on this particular paper. So solvent will start moving, and it will start moving and reach to a particular solvent front. Okay. So as you can see, same thing, the sample spot is there, right? This is the paper and this is the clipping, that means where you hold the paper up there. Okay, and glass lid which is closed. So on doing this, slowly it will start rising, and a similar scenario will arise the way you have seen it here. The same scenario will arise here also, where you will have a particular on this paper. So on this paper, from this spot A, you will see one spot here, one spot here, and one spot here. Okay, this is the original spot, and this would be at a for component A, and this distance may be for component B, and this distance may be for solvent. This is for solvent. So depending upon different components, as they will undergo different partition to different extents, traveled at the different speed, and as they ascend to different heights. So thereby we can say the same formula can be used here also, that RF, okay, retention factor, would be equal to y dash by x, okay, y dash by x, and this is for A. Similarly, RFB would be y by x. Using these two distances, we will it would help us understand, how these compounds are far away from each other, how it can be separated out. Got it? And this type of chromatography is mostly seen for analyzing drugs. Okay, so different drugs which have different composition of organic substances. Got it? So I think just an overview, guys. So I hope all of you got an idea about what are the purification methods. Okay. To summarize, we had crystallization, sublimation, distillation, okay, differential extraction, and finally chromatography. So please go through these notes. It's not it's very simple as long as you just have a reading of it. Well, JEE Advance, you don't see much of a questions from this area, but JEE Mains definitely one of the questions can always come in from this section. Okay, so have a thorough reading on that. So I think this note should help you around. Now, coming to the next point, which is the detection of elements. Okay, now detection of elements as in if an organic compound has a presence of halides, sulfur, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, correct? So if these are the compounds which are present in an organic compound, then how do we get to know what is how do we detect that there is a presence of these elements, presence of this particular elements in the molecule? So to do that, we have different techniques adopted. So this section is what we call it as the qualitative analysis of organic compounds. Okay, so let me summarize few areas. See, things which I will try to point out is I'll just try to read it out, and things wherever you don't know or where we need to write something, I'll tell you there. Okay, suppose check out a study of carbon and its compounds, that is usually called as the organic chemistry, right? So you know that. And as per the old definition, all the living organisms are usually called as the organic compounds, right? But you know, Wohler has been found out that we can prepare the organic compounds or synthesize organic compounds using inorganic substance like ammonium cyanide. So if you take ammonium cyanide, heating it, you will get urea. So that was the breakthrough, understanding that we can actually interconvert inorganic to organic compounds. Okay. Now, detection, if you check out, there are two types of detections of organic compounds. One is qualitative analysis, one is quantitative analysis. Quantitative analysis, as in, you have come across Geldahl's Dumas method, that is the case. And qualitative, as in how we will use Lassen's test for detection of different elements. So basically here we are analyzing the elements or radicals which are present in the unknown organic compound. Okay, so that is the whole idea behind this. Yeah. So see, organic compounds analysis. So first, detection of carbon and hydrogen. Okay, so organic compounds are passed through the heated cupric oxide so that the carbon is oxidized to carbon dioxide. Okay, so this will get oxidized to carbon dioxide, and hydrogen is oxidized to H2O. Okay, so to show you as the overall reaction, right? So what is happening here is that CuO, when you add it with any hydrocarbon, so on heating it would become CO2 gas plus H2O. And we can measure the quantity of carbon dioxide, H2O, compare the ratios, and try to analyze that using quantitative analysis. That is the other method, Lieberg's method, by which we can uh, understand, identify exactly how many carbons and hydrogens are present. Okay. Now, presence of carbon dioxide can confirm, right, by passing through the lime water test, right? So if you take lime water and react that with carbon dioxide, okay, so we would get calcium carbonate, which is white PPT. And to further detect whether it is white PPT because of carbon dioxide, you again pass excess amount of carbon dioxide, and adding excess amount it will convert into calcium bicarbonate, and this is a clear solution. Okay, so this is the way we can understand the presence of carbon dioxide. Okay, H2O can be confirmed by using anhydrous copper sulfate. Anhydrous copper sulfate is normally white in color. That if you treat it with H2O, you would get copper sulfate dot 5 H2O, which is blue in color. So if there is a presence of water, definitely uh, it will turn copper sulfate anhydrous will turn blue in color. Okay, that's about carbon and hydrogen. Now see the detection of nitrogen, sulfur, halide, phosphorus. Okay, and this is done by, okay, Lassen's test. So Lassen's test is also known as the sodium extract test. So idea is to make something called a sodium extract. So in order to convert an organic compound uh, which is normally covalent bonded, we want that to first split into ionic form, and that part is what we call it as the sodium extract. Okay, so basically suppose in this case if we check out, there is a sulfur, nitrogen, oxygen, halide present. Okay, so if these are present, right, after making a sodium extract of this organic compound, we would get organic compounds, ionic compounds like Na2S, okay, NaX, we may get Na2O, we would get NaN3, we would get NaP3 in case if phosphorus is present. Got it? So we would get different types of ionic compounds of sodium. Okay. Analyzing these ionic compounds, we will get to know the presence of that particular element. Okay. So how do we prepare the sodium extract? Well, you see, we take small amount of organic compound and mix with sodium metal in fusion tube, and that fusion tube is heated to a flame till it becomes red hot. Okay. Then add this to the red hot tube. Add this red hot tube into distilled water. Okay. So sudden change in the temperature crushes that glass rod and filtrate the clear solution, and that filtrate is called the sodium extract. Please ensure that sodium extract should be clear solution. If it is colored, then it indicates incomplete decomposition of organic compound. Okay, so you have to maybe reheat again. So if the organic compound is volatile liquid having boiling point less than 100 degrees, add some sucrose in order to elevate the boiling point. You have learned this already in elevation in boiling point, depression in freezing point from solutions colligative properties. So we can increase the boiling point by adding a non-volatile solute. So a non-volatile solute like sucrose can be added, right? So that will elevate the boiling point. Okay. So pictorially, if at all I want, if at all you can understand this, check it out. We take this is that sodium. We have added sodium with a compound. Okay, and we take uh, and heat this sodium in the substance, and as the fumes will start coming, we'll take that glass glass tube and uh, plunge into the distilled water, okay, of 10 to 15 ml, right? So it will break. As soon as it breaks, again you take that broken pieces and boil for 5 minutes. So everything will convert into liquid, and put that liquid and filtrate it. Okay, so that extract is what is called as Lassen's extract or sodium extract. So that's how you would get the sodium extract in general. Okay, see this point. Small amount of ethanol may be added in order to completely decompose the sodium metal. So in case sodium is remained by any chance, so add some amount of ethanol and that will complete the decomposition and make it a clear solution. Okay. Usually the sodium extract thus obtained will be basic in nature because intentionally we will add some amount of ethanol before, so we will have some amount of NaOH also forming, so Na2O which is forming, so that would also be basic in nature, right? So because it will be basic in nature, to neutralize this, these sodium extract and NaOH, large amount of H2SO4 is added, okay, but not HCl. HCl may again disturb the presence of halides here, so that's why we would take the large amount of H2SO4 and we will try to neutralize whatever the excess amount of NaOH that has been formed or the basic medium which has been attained. Okay. So that's how we make the sodium extract. Now to the sodium extract, let us see how we can detect the nitrogen first. So to this sodium extract prepared, add freshly prepared FeSO4 and NaOH. Okay, so we got to prepare freshly prepared FeSO4 and NaOH. Okay, so when we do that, what do we get here? So firstly, if you add FeSO4 to NaOH, we will get a green color precipitate of FeOH thrice, FeOH twice. This is green color. Okay, so you will get this as a green color. Okay, and then Na2SO4. So this FeOH thrice, green color, right? So this green color can be mixed with NaCN in case if cyanide is present. If nitrogen is present, it will give us as NaCN. Okay. So wait, I haven't written that. I'll write it here. What all things we will get from sodium extract. So let me write it here. Organic compound plus sodium on heating, we will get sodium extract. Okay. In case if there is nitrogen present and in this sodium extract, you will see an ionic compound which is NaCN forming. In case if there is any halide present, C plus halide plus sodium, then you will say NaX is forming. In case if there is some sulfur present, you will see Na2S forming. In case if there is nitrogen as well as sulfur, you would see NaCNS forming, okay, or SCN. Okay, and this NaSCN can be further heated to make it as NaCN plus Na2S. We can separate them also. So Na plus phosphorus, in case if it is present, so it will form Na3P. Okay. So I hope the idea is clear that what are the different types of ionic compounds which are forming, while this sodium extract is been done. So for test of nitrogen, as you can see, definitely NaCN must be forming in it. So this NaCN, if you directly react that with FeSO4 in NaOH, okay, so this green precipitate, right, so we'll start reacting with NaCN here, right, so with NaCN, and you would get this as Na4 Fe CN6 plus Na2SO4. This is what is formed. Okay. So during this heating, some amount of FeSO4 will also get oxidized to Fe plus 3. And this is what would happen. Fe plus 3, it will convert into Fe plus 3. So this compound which is formed, right? So this compound which is formed will react with FeSO3 to form, okay, Fe4 Fe CN6 3, and that's a precipitate which appears in Prussian blue color. Okay, this is a very, very important reaction. Even in inorganic, you will see detection of Fe plus 2 or plus 3 can be done using this reaction. Okay, so understand this, how Prussian blue is coming. So any Fe plus 2 salt, if you mix it with Fe plus 3 salt, they will convert into a complex which is Prussian blue in color. Okay. We can also write the equation this way also, like FeOH twice, which is forming as a green precipitate, on reaction with NaCN is forming Na4 Fe CN6. Okay, and imagine if this oxidation is not done properly, or rather there is not much of an oxidation that has been seen, then you can add some amount of FeCl3 after the solution is formed. So on adding that, again it will convert back to Prussian blue. Okay. So in case if that heat is not sufficient to bring enough amount of Fe plus 3, you can use this. Got it? So the idea is to get the detection of nitrogen, we need to make sure that there is some Prussian blue color of iron complex forming. So then definitely it is a detection for nitrogen. Okay. See this, small amount of H2SO4 may be added to the above solution to dissolve FeOH twice, which is slightly basic. Otherwise, it will mask the Prussian blue color. So, in case if there is more amount of FeOH twice which is forming or there, we can add some amount of H2SO4 to that, so that that green color get diminished and only the Prussian blue color highlights. Okay. So compounds, see this, compounds which do not have carbon along with nitrogen will not give this test. Okay, compounds with which do not have carbon along with nitrogen. For example, if you have NH2 and NH2, this is called hydrazine. Okay. Hydrazine does not even have carbon. Okay, so if that is the case, we can't say that okay, this is going to give a positive test, positive Lessons test for detection of nitrogen. No, it won't. Again, this was a JEE question once asked which of the following will give positive Lessons test. All right. So hydrazine does not give it because there is no presence of carbon, so that the cyanide part is formed. Okay. Another type of question that is asked is some compounds which lose or liberate N2 gas on heating will also not give this test. For example, diazonium salts. What are diazonium salts? Basically, if you have any R group attached to N triple bond N plus and Cl minus, this type of a salt is called the diazonium chloride salt. This could be with the alkyl group or with the aryl group. Benzene form is called as aryl group. I'm sure you know that. So N triple bond N plus and Cl minus. Okay. This is highly unstable. This is highly unstable. In fact, benzene diazonium chloride is stable only below 5 degrees centigrade. Okay. So even with a small increase in temperature, immediately this N2 will come out, because it N2 has the highest enthalpy of dissociation. Got it? So it is very stable molecule. So, and it is a super leaving group. If you have already learned how the leaving group has to be learned, right? So N2 is a super leaving group, so it will instantly depart from that R part. Okay, so diazonium salts will easily give out N2 at slightly high temperature. Even azo compounds for that matter, if you check out azo compounds here, azo compounds on heating will form radicals like this. Okay, this dot, and this will become N2 plus this dot. Okay, so N2 will come out and this dots will get terminated to form something like this. Okay, so therefore any azo group present, azo as in N double bond N, so wherever you have N double bond N also, it is unstable, so they will immediately remove N2. Okay, you can understand this way that they will have enough lone pair repulsions and the bond length is very small, so they won't be very stable there with the other carbon. So they would be more stable with N as a N2 molecule with triple bond. Okay, I think the examples are clear. So wherever you see diazonium salt, azo compounds, definitely they will not give positive Lessons test. Okay. Next thing, if nitrogen content is too low, okay, if nitrogen content is too low, then just a green color colloidal solution is obtained. If nitrogen content is too low, then just a green color colloidal solution is obtained. Okay, so just remember that. So nothing much of a writing that has to be done there. See next the sulfur part of it, detection of sulfur. So sulfur in organic compound is converted to Na2S, which can be confirmed from the following test. Okay. So first of all, if at all there is a sulfur, we know that there is a sulfide ion forming, S2 minus ion. And amazingly, S2 minus forms a lot of precipitates with different metals. Okay. If you check out copper sulfide, copper sulfide, Ag2S, HGS, PBS, NIS, okay, COS, cobalt, FES, all of them are black precipitates. Okay, all these are black precipitates. So you can in fact take any of the salts, copper salt or silver salt, mercury salt, and react that with Na2S. You will definitely get a black color precipitate. Okay, and another important detection is zinc. Okay, ZnS is white precipitate, and whereas MnS is pink or buff. MnS is pink or buff precipitate. In quantitative analysis in inorganic, you have to remember this colors. It's very, very important. Okay. So sodium extract, if you react that with any lead salt, got it, lead acetate salt, then you will get this as black precipitate. That's the detection. You take any of the metal, usually lead is taken here. So then you can also react that with zinc chloride so that you can get white precipitate. So this is giving a confirmation that there is a presence of sulfide group. Okay. But the main confirmatory test that need to be done is nitroprusside test. So we take sodium extract, we react that with Na2 Fe CN5NO. This is the complex which we use. Okay, this is usually red orange in color, and as you add the colorless sodium extract to that, it will convert into Na4 Fe CN5NOS. This is the complex that it is formed. Okay, so which is purple color or violet color. Okay, so this gives a detection. So this gives a detection that sulfur is present. The idea is clear. So red orange is giving purple color. Okay, so that's about the sodium extract for detection of sulfur. Suppose in the compound we have nitrogen sulfur present together, then how do we find out? Okay. So you can see that carbon, nitrogen, sulfur, all of them are present together. Then the sodium extract that will be formed is, Na plus and SCN minus. So you will have this as Na plus and SCN minus plus Na plus. Got it? Okay. So here normally this CNS is not the right way of representing. You can check it out that it can be written as SCN minus. Okay. Now CNS or SCN, right? Don't worry about the structure of SCN minus. As we go ahead in organic, we will learn about how these two structures are different. Okay. So NaCNS, that is the salt extract. Right? If you react that with FeCl3, that is plus 3 oxidation state of iron, it will convert into FeCN thrice, which is a deep red blood color solution. It's not a precipitate. It's very important to understand that it is not a precipitate. It is just a coloration. Okay. This can be represented in a complex form also as FeSCN thrice, H2O thrice, overall plus 3. Okay, sorry, overall minus, overall 0. Okay. Yeah, this way. It is the same representation, guys. Okay, either you represent it that way or this way, it is the same. So it will have a deep red coloration. Okay. Now, in fact, you can make, how we have done the, sulfur test and nitrogen test. So we can actually use some amount of excess amount of sodium, add excess amount of sodium and convert that to NaCN and Na2S and do the detection separately for cyanide and sulfide. So thereby you'll get the detection of nitrogen and sulfur both present on it. So on adding excess amount of sodium, this is what you will see. So you can carry out the test separately after adding sodium, or you can directly use the detection of nitrogen and sulfur together. Okay. Sometimes some amount of sulfur is being reduced, right? So in the form, in the sulfur which you have, it may be a oxidized form of sulfur. That means if you have carbon, suppose if this is how the chain that has been present in the organic substance, okay, so somewhere this type of a sulfur chain is present. Now this might even get oxidized to form some amount of colloidal sulfur. So this sulfur is called colloidal sulfur. So in case some amount of sulfur is present, we can actually oxidize that sulfur. So you can see a small amount of organic compound is fused with a mixture of KNO3 and Na2CO3. So the sulfur, if at all present, is oxidized to Na2SO4. So this way you can oxidize that sulfur into Na2SO4, where nitrate, potassium nitrate will get reduced to potassium nitrite. So that's how you can get this oxidation. Okay. Right. Again, not very much asked in JEE, just have a reading, but that is enough. Okay. Detection of halogens. This is an important part in JEE. This is most asked area. So sodium extract, if you add it to AgNO3, in case if there is any chloride, bromide or iodide present, you will see various precipitations. AgCl will be white, AgBr will be pale yellow, AgA being yellow. Okay. And to confirm their presence, right, so if you mix that with ammonium hydroxide, right, so silver will try to form a complex, ammonium complex like this, and this is a soluble ammonium complex, and same is the case here also. We'll have soluble ammonium complex. Okay, but here it is insoluble. With iodide it is insoluble. So if there is an insoluble amount, it is clear detection that iodine is present, because bromine and iodine are more or less yellow in only. So you add excess amount of ammonium hydroxide. If it is soluble, it is definitely bromine present. If it is insoluble, it is iodine present. So all these salts, you can see all these salts are soluble in excess amount of NaCN to form AgCN twice minus and hypo Na2S2O3 to form this silver salt. So only in these two they are completely soluble. In cyanates and hypo, that is thiosulfates, the chloride, bromide and iodide precipitates are completely soluble. Okay. Again, one more way, that if you take sodium extract and react with lead acetate in the presence of NaCl, you will see that it would form PbCl2. In the presence of NaBr, you will get PbBr2. If it is NaI, it would be PbI2. Okay. So PbCl2, Br2 are white color and PbI2 is yellow color. So that gives a confirmation of presence of chloride, bromide and iodide. Okay. And another important term you should know is that all of them can dissolve in hot water. Okay. See, these dissolution statements which I am writing are very important in inorganic. So you start hitting your mind once in a while that which are dissolvable. What happens if you add excess? You should start questioning yourself with this. Okay. Next, if organic compound has nitrogen, sulfur along with halogens, then before proceeding the reactions, you know, slightly boil that with concentrated HNO3. Okay. See, basically what happens in case if there is any cyanide or sulfide already present before detection of halogens, so it is mandatory to remove that, cyanide part and sulfide part. So you react that with concentrated HNO3. So that would give us HCN vapors, okay, and NaNO3. So it is exothermic and it makes that to vaporize, and H2S vaporizes and give a plain colorless NaNO3 solution. Okay. So this way you can actually remove HCN and H2S, and then only halides would be present in it. Got it? So I hope the idea is clear now, right? So why we are doing this? Just to make sure the coloration, when it comes to CN minus and S Ag Cn minus is also a precipitate. Ag2S is also a precipitate. PbS is also a precipitate. So these precipitates will also form along with what we are trying to detect above. So you will not get the right color what you needed. So to avoid these precipitations, you have to remove that cyanides and sulfides. Okay. Another important note which you need to check out is F cannot be detected by in the organic compound because both PbF2 and AgF, both of them are soluble and colorless. Okay. Yeah. See, another test is Beilstein test for detection of halogens. Again, this is exclusively for chlorine, bromine, and iodine. In exams, mostly it is asked for chlorine. Okay. Most of the time, I have seen this asked for chlorine. Heat of first, what we do, we heat the copper wire having a loop in the oxidizing part of the flame. So usually when it comes to a Bunsen flame, this part is a reducing flame and this above part is an oxidizing flame. So you put this copper in the oxidizing flame. So when you put the copper in oxidizing flame, usually it will undergo oxidation. So in the presence of O2, it will undergo oxidation to form CuO. Okay. So cool the copper wire. As you cool the copper wire, you will get this reaction back, but this time it will all turn into black. Okay, it will turn into black. So then dip it in the organic compound and heat it again. Okay. So this time a bluish color flame will be seen, right? So if you take that copper after cold and react that with organic compound which has an halide on it. Okay. So it would give, you know, uh, a volatile compound which would have some color like CuX2 that is volatile. That means it will start coming as vapors and that would be colored and those colored vapors will be green in color. Okay. So usually the green color is better seen with chlorine and bromine as compared to iodine. Okay. So detection is much better for chlorine, bromine compared to iodine. So on heating, basically this will convert into copper again and X2 and this X2 would give color. Okay. Right. Again, CuF2 is non-volatile. Okay. So not an appreciable amount of color frame is observed. Okay. That is the reason for not checking out for fluorine. So that is Beilstein's test. So I hope all of you got what exactly is this. Now see this Beilstein test is not reliable for halogens because if it is when it comes to any form of halogens, along with that, if you have quinone, pyridine, urea, thiourea, pyrimidines, okay, so all of them will also give this color. So we cannot detect whether this color is coming from, only halogens or this is coming from different compounds of quinone, pyridine or so. See, all of them have nitrogen in it. Quinone, pyridine, urea, thiourea, right? So we'll have some of the other nitrogens. So hence they would usually form Cn minus, correct? In the sodium extract, they will have NaCN. And amazingly, you will see copper, right? So copper solid cold, which we have got above, if you treat with Cn minus, it would form CuCN, which is also volatile, giving green color film. Okay, so this is the question that is normally asked, that unlike halogens, why we should not use for quinone, pyridine, urea or thiourea. So anywhere there is a nitrogen present in the organic compound, we cannot use this Beilstein test because CuCN will also show that green color flame. Okay, right. Next, see, uh, suppose if there is sulfur present in organic compound, okay, as sulfate, if it is present as sulfate, you can easily remove that. Got it? So no need to apply any Lesson's test. You can simply take that sulfate and react that with barium chloride. You will definitely get barium sulfate precipitate. Okay, and barium sulfate is insoluble in excess of sulfate. If you take excess, it is insoluble. So that easily gives a detection for sulfate. See, when it comes to phosphorus, detection of phosphorus, in case of phosphorus, okay, what we do, uh, we add an oxidizing agent like HNO3 or peroxide or KMNO4, right? So that the entire phosphites which is present, Na3P which is present, which is P3 minus, that will all convert into PO4 3 minus. With in the presence of oxidizing agent, it will convert to PO4 3 minus. From PO4 3 minus, if we react that with ammonium molybdate, okay, MOO4, that is molybdate, ammonium molybdate, then you will get a complex like this, NO4 thrice PO4 dot 12 MOO3. Okay, so this looks like canary yellow in color, canary yellow. Okay, this type of yellow color. Sorry, so I'll say this type of yellow color formation. So canary yellow color is formed, okay, and this is read as ammonium phosphate molybdate. Okay, so that gives the detection for phosphorus. Okay, so I think all of you understood this. So this is the two parts which I wanted to discuss with you. Okay, so students, I would suggest you go through the NCERT book first. I've given you pages. Go through those pages first. Then compare with the class notes. I'll share these class notes now. Okay, learn about lessons test because that is one important area here. Okay, learn how the detection is done. Based on that, I'm sharing, I think already madam has shared one assignment. Along with that, I'm sharing exclusively an assignment, a simple assignment based on uh, this quantitative test, based on qualitative test. And tomorrow we will discuss all about qualitative test, the problem solving by Dumas method, Gelda's method, where to use, what type of a problems usually come across, right? So this is all we'll discuss tomorrow. Meanwhile, you finish this part of it, and also I will start discussing about the basics of IUPAC nomenclature which you have to write. I'm sure you have learned all of this. Okay, keep it a bit of patience for the first 2 3 classes. Then we'll do a lot of problem solving as you go ahead. So I'll keep posting a lot of questions here and tell you all the exceptional cases wherever it is required. Okay, guys. So I will end the session. All the students who has any doubts, they can WhatsApp me or they can put it on the chat box. Okay, so I can I'll try to close it. If anybody has to say something, please do say now.